the vast plains of verdant green pastures underneath the equally green ridge belies the past of Dongaon Watershed. Not too long ago, Dongaon was suffering the most punishing of droughts, which threatened to decimate the very existence of the village. Crops were failing, and whatever crops survived yielded marginal outputs, barely enough to feed the families. People had begun to migrate to adjoining Andhra Pradesh in search of jobs as laborers on the rice farms. And then fate intervened. The Dongaon watershed is situated in the Biloli Taluka of Nanded district. It falls in the Marathwada region of Maharashtra state. Dongaon is remote, very remote. The nearest highway is 8 kilometers away. Until a few years ago, there was no road to connect it with the outer world. Dongaon receives an average rainfall of 800 to 1000 millimeters annually. The erosion hazard is very high in the undulating topography. Since external sources of irrigation do not exist, the entire agricultural activity is dependent on the mercies of the rains. This resulted in the usual vicious cycle. During rainfall, there used to be growth of a good cover of grasses, enough to take care of the livestock. Once the monsoons were over, the slopes used to be exposed to free grazing, thus denuding the existing vegetation. A consistent exploitation led to entire tracts of land being reduced to wastelands. Add to this the severe political differences within the village, where the panchayat elections were fought like wars. Dongaon had little hope.
It was December 1991. I was the village sarpanch then. Our village was divided into two political factions. My political rival was Devidas Deshmukh. During the elections, there would be a lot of animosity in the village. There was absolutely no unity here. Due to severe drought conditions, we decided to implement the Watershed Programme. Now, Watershed Programme requires ban on cutting of trees, ban on free grazing of animals, and shramdan. People have to be committed to the program and voluntarily. This has to be done by educating the people about the program. However, the people knew the political differences between me and Devidas Deshmukh. They were reluctant to listen to either of us. They wanted us to resolve our individual differences first before trying to convince them. So it took some time for the program to be launched in the village.
A village which is thirsty can be willing to make compromises, but compromises do not come easy. The process took almost a year and a half before the Watershed Programme got underway with the help of the Watershed Organisation Trust, Ahmednagar.
To compound this problem, the people knew nothing about the Watershed Programme. This was the first such program in our region. The Soil Conservation Department had done some drainage line treatments in the area, but these were isolated efforts. Watershed development requires an integrated approach. Considerable efforts are required, so people were hesitant. Besides, the Watershed Programme expected them to contribute, which they had never done before on public projects.
There were government schemes which the government used to plan and implement on its own. People's participation was not required. So people were unwilling when they were asked to contribute.
People had their usual queries.
One group was that of landless laborers. The other comprised of farmers having farms on slopes. The third group was of farmers who had their lands on the plains below. The farmers on the slopes resisted the Watershed Programme because they thought the farmers having lands below would benefit the most with the increase in the water table. However, we convinced them by saying that they too would benefit since the CCTs would ensure that the water would not run off the slopes but would remain in the trenches and consequently in their farms for a longer duration. Then there were the landless laborers who openly questioned the benefits of the watershed projects for them. It took time for resolving these genuine queries. Watershed development is a process and it is important to give people time to think and reach a decision. Any village which gets convinced quickly and takes a hasty decision to implement the program without allowing sufficient time for the people to think faces problems later during implementation.
Almost 25% of the Dongaon watershed comprises of grazing pastures. It is common land. Now, with the implementation of the watershed program, some of the bigger landholders who also had larger livestock holdings were worried because of ban on free grazing in the project area.
But we had planned the implementation of the watershed program right from the beginning. We divided watershed area into 4 parts and began implementing the treatment in phased manner. Hence, the villagers could graze their livestock in areas where the implementation had not begun. By the time we completed the project, there was enough fodder available, and as the phases progressed, people got used to the concept of ban on free grazing.
After the first phase was implemented, grass was available and we allowed people to cut the grass and feed their animals. People now realize that the fodder was available despite of the ban on free grazing. The fear that fodder would not be available for their livestock after the implementation of watershed program slowly subsided from their minds.
Slowly, people began to join in, and to the credit of Dongaon, they completed their initial 4 mandatory shramdans and passed the basic selection criteria of the program. The Dongaon watershed comprises of 3 villages, Dongaon, Kerur and Bijur. During the capacity building phase, watershed treatments were taken up in an area of 150 hectares. The NGO Sanskriti Samvardhan Mandal conducted several meetings at the village level to generate consensus amongst the villagers. The Gram Sabha then nominated the village watershed committee using criteria to ensure representation by all the political groups.
Nominations were also made on the basis of locations. The people themselves suggested the names, and we thus formed the Village Watershed Committee.
The VWC at Dongaon worked admirably and was able to address various issues arising during the project. And today, even over a year after completion of the project, the VWC still meets regularly to discuss the post-watershed strategies and maintenance of the watershed treatments.
Earlier, the committee members used to go to the site personally, but later began to depend on the Panlot Sevaks or watershed supervisors. So there used to be problems.
We would try and resolve the issue on the spot. However, if there were disagreements, we would bring it up before the committee. The committee would appoint 2 of its members to intervene and sort out the problem. Their decisions would be considered final.
Rules can only be effective if they are enforced and with equality. The first person to run on the wrong side of the road was none other than the influential Baba Guruji. His cattle were found grazing in the watershed project area. No exception was made.
We found 4 of Baba Guruji's animals grazing in the project area. We charged him a penalty of rupees 50 per animal. Baba Guruji did not speak to me for 15 days, but I was willing to accept even that if it were for the betterment of the village. Rules should be followed by everybody.
It sent a clear signal to all the villagers that if an influential person like Baba Guruji can be penalized, then everybody better comply with the conditions of watershed.
We sent notices to all the neighboring villages that if their animals were found grazing in the watershed area, they would be penalized. We tried to create a public awareness about the issue of free grazing.
During the entire duration of the project, the VWC managed to collect over 40,000 rupees, which included fines levied on defaulters and sale of excess grass. The major portion of this amount being from sale of grass cut from the project area and common land. Such was the impact of the watershed. A village which had a shortfall of fodder 4 years back now had a surplus which was being sold for a profit. Under the Watershed Project, a number of activities were undertaken in order to trap and conserve rainwater, control soil erosion, increase the vegetative cover, improve soil moisture regime, as well as recharge the groundwater aquifers. Measures such as plantation of trees, continuous contour trenches, stone bunds, gully plugs, and check dams were implemented on a ridge-to-valley basis. Apart from the village watershed committee, 6 self-help groups of women were formed, which managed to save about 49,700 rupees during the project period. The groups also organized plant nurseries, which supplied saplings to the project. In all, 1,25,000 saplings were produced in a period of 4 years, earning the women an amount of 89,000 rupees. The self-help groups had also implemented health programs like pulse polio immunization with a lot of zest. Children and their mothers benefited from this since the women were locals and they knew which family had young children who should be immunized as opposed to the government social workers who were outsiders and not aware of the local situation and probably not even interested. The NGO Sanskriti Samvardhan Mandal also introduced a very progressive concept called the Kishori Vikas Varg. Young girls would come together and learn about personal hygiene, crafts and personality development. The girls enjoyed the class and are asking for more.
We gave the girls sports equipment like badminton rackets, skipping ropes and frisbees. We also gave them needles and material for stitching, knitting and embroidery. The lady social worker used to give us a lot of information on personal hygiene and personality development. She taught us various crafts like stitching and embroidery. We want to learn more. Most of the girls from earlier batch are married now. We are planning programs for younger girls who have joined recently.
However, once the Watershed project was completed, the class got terminated because of the lack of funds for paying the teacher, who used to be paid a fee of 300 rupees per month. While the parents surely could afford this amount, the village needs to do some thinking on this matter and decide whether or not it is willing to support the development of its young women. Water is the key to development. Though watershed projects may help water to be available, the key to sustainable development lies in developing a comprehensive plan for the usage of water.
Water is now available due to the Watershed program, but the real development will now depend on how we make use of this water. We had 5 lakh rupees in our maintenance fund. Half of this amount is to be deposited in fixed deposits as per project norms. So, in the remaining amount, only about 2 wells can be constructed. The soil in our area is very loose and the digging, construction, putting up of motor and pipes becomes expensive. So we made a list of wells in the village and decided to advance 20 to 30,000 rupees to 10 wells which were in bad shape but could be repaired and revived.
This literally changed the lives of Ramrao Sompure and his neighbor Sheshrao Maste.
The mud walls of my well had collapsed, and I did not think that it would ever give us any water, even though the water table had risen. The banks were not willing to give loans for the repairing of well. I approached our watershed committee and they helped me. This is the third crop that I had taken. I also give water from my well to my neighbor Sheshrao Maste. He gives me 20% of his crops in return.
The water from Ramrao's well has brought wealth for his neighbor Sheshrao too.
I spent 2 to 3,000 rupees in putting the pipeline from Sompure's well to my tobacco crop. My investment paid off because this additional water added almost 20,000 rupees per acre of tobacco output.
Tobacco is sold at about 4,000 rupees per quintal and each acre produces about 10 quintals. That is about 40,000 rupees per acre, which is twice as much output of the unirrigated land.
Dongaon has a soil which can produce an excellent quality of tobacco. It also has a climate which is conducive for this crop. In the pre-watershed days, the produce would not be good enough. The leaves of the plants would be small and the quantity generated made it an unviable proposition. However, with the availability of water increasing with the watershed treatments, the farmers have crafted a success story out of this newfound boon. The farmers of Dongaon entered into agreements with the tobacco company and secured deals which are lucrative as well as assured. It is not just the tobacco leaves. The farmers have set up their own curing units. This processing brings in value addition to the agricultural produce and has resulted in more employment opportunities.
Initially, the landless laborers kept away from the watershed program. They felt that the program would benefit only the farmers and landholders. But they failed to realize that after the watershed program, things would improve for them too. If you consider just one crop like say tobacco, The total area in which tobacco is cultivated is over 100 acres. Further, this tobacco has to undergo a process called smoke curing, which is a skilled job. So the laborers have twice the amount of work that is during cultivation and while smoke curing. About 25 to 30 families of laborers have now become experts in smoke curing. They are offered higher wages and sought after even by farmers from the neighboring villages.
The irrigated area in Dongaon has gone up from 15 hectares to 70 hectares now. There is scope for bringing more area under irrigation. As funds begin to be available, more wells will be dug and more land will be brought under irrigation. Though we notice that the total number of wells for perennial and 8 monthly crops have almost doubled, the dependence on wells for 4 and 6 monthly crops has reduced considerably, since the needs of these crops are fulfilled by the moisture retention within the soil. One notices a significant expansion of farming activity in the rain-fed areas from 1,143 hectares to 1,315 hectares. But the most significant observation is seen in the cropping pattern. There is a diversification of crops and introduction of new high-value crops like tobacco, mango and orange. Dropping of crops requiring more water, like paddy in most of the watershed, is another step in the positive direction. Another positive aspect observed is the change in the livestock pattern. The low-yielding local breed of cows are being phased out and new crossbred cows have been introduced. The goat population has also reduced drastically. These are welcome changes because goats are voracious foragers and can damage any type of plant cover. The improvement in buffalo population has helped increase yields for the villagers, but these are just a few physical changes which can be observed. What is more impressive is that a village which witnessed elections being fought like wars now has unopposed panchayat elections, with work being available locally and consistently. The migration has been reversed cent%. The project generated 1.38 lakh work days at a total cost of almost 55 lakh rupees. Better wages in the watershed projects have proved to be a boon for people who had a firm desire to change their lives. One such story is that of Subhash Waghmare.
I was studying in college when my brother met with an accident and was paralyzed. The responsibility of my rather large joint family fell on my shoulders. Fortunately, the watershed project was being implemented in our village. So I and my other family members got employment in our village itself. We worked hard and saved money. With great difficulty, I started this grocery store, which proved successful, and within the first year, I recovered my investment. Last year, I earned about 36,000 rupees and I purchased an auto rickshaw for my brother.
Today, Subhash is a role model for his other Dalit brothers who have seen his struggle against odds. On the other hand, a few traditionally migrant families of stonemasons have constructed their houses on land given to them by the village and have finally settled down. There have been some rough edges, but then Dongaon was the very first project in the Marathwada region. How do the people rate themselves?
90%, 90%, 101%, 102, 102, 90%, 90%, 101%, 101%, 70%.
I will give only 60% marks to Dongaon.
I gave 70% marks to our project because the technical part of the watershed treatment was completed successfully. However, work needs to be done in the health sector and knowledge sector.
We were not very successful in the women's development component of the project.
An overall growth has been recorded in the family assets, with the annual income especially from irrigated land jumping from 45,000 rupees to 70,000 on an average. The number of television sets has jumped up from 1 set during the pre-watershed era to 29 during the post-watershed. Cycles, motorcycles, tempos and tractors are commonly seen in the village. With 15 houses having their own telephones, Dongaon has certainly come closer to the outside world. Several exposure visits are being conducted by other villages to Dongaon. People from far and near come here to witness the radical changes here. With a decent road now connecting the village to the main road, Dongaon now sees a traffic which also comprises of government vehicles. Thanks to the Watershed Project, Dongaon's history of being neglected by the administration is slowly being reversed.